Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets. Welcome to Adeptus On-Air. For our latest episode, today we have a very special guest. We have Karen Walters, who is an HR specialist, one of the best in her field, has worked all over the country, most recently with the Atlanta Falcons, for 20 years, and we'll dig into that. Karen, thank you for joining Adeptus On-Air.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Excellent. The honor is mutual. Thank you so much. Karen, for starters, I always like to kind of dig in from the beginning. Just kind of tell us your background and where things began and how you got into the industry that you're in and kind of rose up to the high levels that you are.
Oh, sure. So I fell into the human resources field as a teenager and wasn't really sure what that meant, but it was a good fit. So that was my good fortune there. And I haven't moved around a lot in my career. I learned a lot when I worked at Unisys, which is a really large international IT firm. So I was there for many years. And then I really didn't seek out sports necessarily, but I thought, well, maybe I should move to a different, new challenge. And the Atlanta Falcons at that time, they had posted a position for a human resources manager. And it was right after the team had been purchased. So I just went on that journey and started talking with them about what that might look like. And it ended up being a long-term stay for me.
That's awesome. And you mentioned team building and things like that. It's such an important topic today. How have cultures changed from, say, 20 years ago to now? Because society has seemingly changed a lot. So I'm sure in your world, cultures have changed. And that's kind of a key word that I hear a lot, but don't quite, if you can kind of, define that for us. And then also, how much has that changed in the last 20 years or so?
I think hierarchical is the word that comes to my mind. When I think back, 20 years ago, what I was doing at least where I was working, it felt very top down. Like, okay, I know my position and I know where I fit in the organization. And I know these people that are walking around in fancy suits are probably the ones that I should be listening to. And I should, perform the duties on my job description and maybe do a little extra. But that was kind of the extent of it. Just hopefully people are being nice to each other, but let's just get our work done. And of course, it's still that way today. But I think that we put more emphasis now on what it feels like to work somewhere, and that's really all culture means is how you would describe your employment experience to your next door neighbor. What are the words that would come out of your mouth to describe that experience? Because I think we've figured out that it's important. With people are moving around from job to job. Well, how do you keep them? You make them excited to come to work every morning.
That's awesome. That's an awesome lead into segue to my next question. I was going to say, I'm sure the $1 million question you always get. So I want to ask it on this podcast so you can advise others. How do you attract and retain good people?
Well, I think several things. I think a lot of times when companies are designing their website, just their company website, they have their customer in mind, which they should. But there's another audience that's looking at that website, and those are the people that are prospective candidates to come work for you. And so I think we have to keep them in mind too, and have a good employer brand, and kind of describing to potential candidates what it might look like to work there. What's it like? A little peek in the window. But obviously it goes far beyond that. People won't remember what you told them. They'll remember how you made them feel, which is a Maya Angelou quote. And so I'll admit sometimes I've kind of rested on my laurels meaning in the interview process when I was interviewing people for in sports field is like, well, it's okay if I make them wait for 10 minutes. The candidate for the interview,
Yep.
which is very egotistical. It's like, no, I mean, we need to make a great impression on these folks and show them that they are the most important part of our day. So you see, I think it's all the micro moments throughout that process.
And speaking of attracting and retaining good people, the Atlanta Falcons did that with you for 20 years. What was special about the Falcons that not only got you there, but kept you there for 2 decades? When I'm sure you probably had other offers that that came in maybe annually or pretty routinely at that time, and you stayed where you were.
I think it's the purpose. I mean, it wasn't really just about football. It was about the community. It was about impacting people in a positive way, and I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned there. And I learned it quite vividly when we opened up our stadium. We opened up a huge stadium several years ago down in downtown Atlanta, and that just taught me so many lessons because we had to hire 4,000 people, and
Wow.
I was a part of a group that, did that. But then also not only interview them and onboard them, but really inspire them, and show them that no matter what their title was, I mean, it could be concession stand worker or security person. There's a lot of people it takes to run a stadium. We wanted those people to feel like they were the CEO of the stadium, and that, as Arthur would frequently say, their names on the outside of the building, not Mercedes Benz Stadium. Because when people can feel like they are the owner, they're going to own every moment that they're there and do things beyond what you could imagine that they would do. So the purpose behind that is the answer to the question. Plus, it's just a family culture, just really talented people with good intentions.
That's amazing because I remember the process of building the Mercedes Benz Stadium, and I was at the time I was sports reporting, and I think I might have covered a game there. It's an amazing stadium, upper echelon stadium in the entire league. What are your memories from that in terms of your position, the HR position? Did everything go smooth? Was everything timely? Is the process? Were there bumps in the road? Just kind of give us a little insight on just from laying the groundwork to the actual stadium opening and you hosting the Super Bowl, all those things.
Wow. Yeah, it was many years in the making. I always tell people that the superstars of that story were the people that years in advance of that stadium even being designed were getting approval for the stadium to be done at all. So it's almost like a political thing where you have to wine and
Yeah.
dine and get approval to do all that stuff.
Yep.
So it was years in the making, and so it was a marathon, not a sprint. But I think I was most proud of in the years leading up to the design and opening of the stadium of how much we involved all of our associates in generating ideas. What do you think the stadium should look like? What are some amenities that you think we should have? What when your department moves into the stadium, what do you want it to be? And so we did that in some fun ways, and so people felt involved. And then I remember we got to go on some hard hat tours of the stadium before it was finished, which of course I got very winded walking up those stairs now that I'm thinking about it. But it was fun. It was like leading up to it, and we got to write our names on the drywall before it was, sealed and
Wow.
all that those types of things. So it was a really positive experience. And then, as I said, the hiring of the 4,000 people, I don't remember it as being like as you're describing it, that it didn't go smoothly. It was a lot of work. I remember getting up at 4 a.m. many weeks in a row because we were doing these very early orientation sessions. But it was not hard because it was exciting.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And a couple questions earlier, you mentioned Arthur. For the audience doesn't know, that's Atlanta Falcons owner Arthur Blank, who's owned the team for probably going on about over 20 years now, I
Mhm.
believe. Tell us about working for Arthur Blank. He's very philanthropic. He thinks beyond sports. Just what did you learn from him over the years? What has that experience been like?
It's easy being a human resources person for Arthur because he's a big cheerleader for the HR function. I think he was the co-founder of Home Depot and learned a lot in that experience, as we can only imagine. Starting that from nothing, bringing it to what it is today. So he had learned a lot of the people lessons and had come to our organization with a set of core values that were important at Home Depot, but they were also going to be important in what we were doing. It doesn't have anything to do with hardware. Core values are kind of transcend the industry. So that's just really, I hate to be cliche about it, but that's who he is as a core values led leader. And I feel like I got a couple PhDs just in being in that experience with him of using those core values as a compass, making those hard decisions. I mean, I think one of the biggest things I learned is like when there's a really hard decision that a leader's making and they're, should I go this way or should I go that way? There's a core value at play as to how they're making that decision. So he did things just as an example, like he decided that the stadium seats were going to be much larger than what was originally contemplated because he wanted people to be comfortable in the seats.
Interesting.
And that meant we had fewer people in the stadium.
Exactly.
Or he, you know, the pricing of the food you might be aware is really inexpensive in that stadium. So with hot dogs is a $2 or something,
Oh
just
wow.
not what you would typically see in
Yeah.
a stadium. But again, he did that based on principle, based on a core value. So that's honestly what inspired me to start my business. Is just the things I learned from him. Is like, wow, like that would be awesome if there's just a lot of employers that operate in that manner.
That's terrific. And I just went to a Miami Marlins game and the hot dog was not $2. Trust me.
Wasn't no,
You don't see
no.
that very many places.
Mhm.
I'll get to beyond culture next. I have one more question because we are a CPA firm. I'm curious from a human resource specialist, how much does a tax component play into the world of human resources?
For our, we had a payroll professionals that had to know a lot about tax from a multi-state perspective. If that's what you're thinking about is, the players playing at different states all the
Yep.
time, and I never even tried to understand any of that. And then I guess the other part of tax that I remember so much from that experience is just all the different businesses that we had and the taxes. We had a very, very sophisticated tax department in our family office because there was
Yes.
so much that had to be done. I just tip my hat to them because it was complicated
Oh yeah.
what they were doing.
Yeah, tax code is extremely complicated. In a business your size, it's smart to have an in-house,
Yes.
component there. And I will say, just through my experience, because we have over 270 professional athletes in all four major sports that we do tax work for. And as you mentioned, you have to file a return in every state that they play in. There's two road preseason games, in the home place, obviously, where there's multiple dates, and then also the other eight or nine road games that they play in. So it can get complicated, but the NFL teams are very on it, and on top of it in terms of, if we need payroll requests or W-2s or things like that, that they usually get it to us, pretty well. So.
Yeah.
Kudos to the NFL and the Falcons, and they're pretty easy to work with overall to get that kind of information. Beyond Culture Consulting, very excited to hear about this. You're jumping into the entrepreneurial space, for the first time. Just what were your thought processes, your emotions, going, into the entrepreneurial space? And I'm sure, it has a lot to do with the HR. As I read online, it has a lot to do with your HR background, and just kind of give us the premise behind that.
Right. Excitement, but I'm not a risk taker. So it's amazing that I'm doing this at all. But I guess I'm kind of proud of myself for taking the leap in the pool. But I had been dreaming about doing something like this for a few years. But I just thought, oh, the timing, I don't know. It's just not right. So I just thought, I'll be open. I turned 55 and
Yeah.
that age was helpful for
Congratulations.
me to get to that, yeah, to get to that age from a benefits perspective. But once I got past that, I just had this passion for almost like a purpose in helping small to medium sized businesses, applying some of these kernels of wisdom that I had gained over the years. And I have encountered just really grateful people who are very great. They're really good at what they do. They just feel maybe a little overwhelmed on the people side of things. And just really enjoy helping them because they're just like, wow, that's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, okay. And it's not hard for me because I just feel like I've been multitasking like a crazy person for so many years.
That's awesome. And I'm thinking you mentioned small business people. They, some of them get into it for the passion for their actual craft or, work. They don't really think about the managing people, dealing with people, the HR side and payroll and things like that. So that's
Hmm.
that's that's really smart. What are some of the common pain points that you see with early clients?
Yeah. So I think confusion maybe so it's probably not shocking to you. Sometimes it's how do I deliver this message? It's a little bit of coaching, or um, how do I navigate through this people issue? People are complicated, it's simple but not,
Yeah,
just depending on what's going on. I enjoy doing some of those workshops where, you do the personality profile on everybody, and then you can look and see how you're similar and different. And that tends to help and is an enjoyable exercise. I've been doing those for years, but to a lot of the businesses I work with, like, wow, that's different. I've never done that before. So, giving people the tools to navigate people challenges. Of course, recruiting is something, but what I've noticed is helping businesses to figure out what their core values are. I just find that to be super important because otherwise you're just operating in such a random setting as far as like what interview questions are you asking? Well, I Googled, interview questions, but we can be so much more strategic by focusing everything around the core values from the time you're posting the position to interviewing to onboarding all the way around the employee life cycle.
what similarities do you see from, small businesses, maybe 100 and less employees to, the Atlanta Falcons that has thousands and thousands of employees or other big businesses that you see? Are there correlations there that you can draw from?
Hmm. Yeah, in some ways it's similar. I'm sure you see this in what you do as well. It's, there's a purpose to the company. There's a lot of heart behind the why of that business. They all need people, it's just the relative size. So I just think lack of support and
Yeah,
lack of infrastructure. I will admit that I'm dealing with people that are very busy. Because it's a small business and they're growing. They're busy, and
that's right.
so I tend to just pitch in and say, hey, what can I do to keep this moving? And so I think it's the lack of support is what I'm noticing the most when you compare those two. But working for the Falcons, when I first started, it's really not that large of an organization. I mean, there's 32 teams. They're pretty small, but it wasn't until later that we grew so much. So I felt like working there, I worked for a totally different business by the time I left 20 years later.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And what advice would you have for young people? Well, I'll start with this. What advice would you have for young people getting into the human resource business today?
Hmm. I think coming along when people are studying, in school and deciding, if that's the field, I think internships, getting some early experiences, I think that's key. I started as an intern, and what I remember about that is just not really necessarily learning a lot about HR, but more just how to communicate in a business setting.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
what not to say and how to do this and what's the water cooler type situation and just how do people interact. That's what I learned from being an intern. So I think not being shy about that. getting involved early, getting some good mentors. Don't be afraid to ask somebody to be a mentor. Meet with them and learn as you go. So I think it's experiential learning is how I developed so well, is having great mentors, great early experiences, and I just kept building on those.
Excellent. Now, I was going to topple this question in there, but I figured it'd be better to separate it. You've hired many people before. You've probably operated many job interviews before. Um, what what can future employees do to make themselves attractive in interviews and beyond just their resume? Because a lot of people are qualified, but what impresses you to make you say, okay,
Hmm.
I want to hire that person?
I think connection and being genuine. I think we've all studied for that big interview before, and we've rehearsed what answers we're going to give to the anticipated questions. But I think interviewers see through that so much. When you can see that you're not being yourself, you can see that you're not showing who you genuinely are. So I think being a real person and being comfortable enough to have a conversation and establish connection with the interviewer. Maybe you're from the same part of the country, or maybe whatever. But make it conversational. We're human beings.
Yeah,
We're not robots. So let's get to know each other in that setting, and don't be afraid to admit. I think one piece of advice people always want to know. Okay, what are my weaknesses? I just think about some big lessons that you've learned. It's like,
yeah,
hey, I had to learn. Sometimes takes me a while to make decisions. So you know what I did? Put myself in some situations where I needed to make a lot of decisions. And after a while, I got some feedback from a mentor, and I just really improved. And so you're sort of admitting a weakness, but you're showing how you conquered that as well.
love that. That's very smart. You actually brought me back to an experience that I had. I was hired at ESPN. I'll just tell you a quick story. I know I'm asking the question now. I'll speak a little bit, give you a little break. But I was hired at ESPN in 2008, and it was the only time never had done this level of interview before. I must have interviewed with seven different people over a 2 day span, in terms of editors, production bosses, executives, things like that. And as you mentioned, the only way, and I remember telling myself to just be myself, just be honest and be myself. They're either going to like me or they're not. I can't pretend to be someone else, not with seven different people for sure. And I
Hmm.
was I was just my genuine self every time, with each person, and answered honestly, and that got me the job. That ended up, I was relaxed and just relaxed in myself. So
Yeah,
that's awesome advice. Awesome advice for
you're
that.
very hireable.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you, thank you very much, especially coming from you, when I'm sure you've operated hundreds of interviews. Hopefully, you all didn't have the seven different people, seven different layers to speak with.
Sometimes. It's
No, I'm sure. Beyond culture, where do you see your business in 3 to 5 years?
a great question. I have I guess I'd like to have a team of people. There is a young lady that works with me already where I can have her involved in some of the projects. So if I were to have two or three people that are working with me, as you say, junior HR people who are wanting to learn, that would be fun. So that way it's kind of a double purpose. I'm helping them to develop as well as helping businesses. So a team of people, and I want to have balance in my life. So, maybe it's 10, 15, 20 customers, but I can provide a high level of service to them, be accessible, but then also enjoy my life.
That's a great plan, and you had mentioned balance. I want to ask, work life balance is very important, for both sides, for the employee, for the employer, and the culture. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe you get that question, especially from business startups. They're probably working 60 hours a week trying to get their business on the rise. How do you have work life balance in today's society?
Mm. I think it's self imposed. I think that we can each individually set boundaries. And sometimes, I mean, I will admit I find myself, as you said, I do put a lot of time into my business, but I don't, I enjoy it. I want to see it grow. So, but I know that I need to set those boundaries, because in the end, you know, what are you going to wish, that you spent more time with family and things like that. So I think a lot of times employers want their team members to have balance, but they'll push it as far as their team members will let them. So um, just not answering those emails as quickly on the weekend, or setting up an agreement with your manager about that. It's like, hey, if it's really an emergency, let me know, but otherwise I'd really love to be off the grid this weekend. So being adult enough to speak up and say, hey, this is important to me.
That's very, very important. That makes a lot of sense. And Karen, if you can tell us where to find you online, LinkedIn, social media, where to find Beyond Culture, a website, just so our listeners and our viewers can check it out.
Oh, of course. So I kept it pretty simple. My name is Karen Walters, and so my website is KarenWalters.com, and so everything will be there. I'm Karen Walters on LinkedIn as well, and then my email is info@KarenWalters.com.
Excellent, excellent. So please check out Karen Walters. Work at the highest levels, and is looking to help future entrepreneurs and business owners, help them with their HR needs. So, Karen, you are awesome. Thank you for all the work you have done and will continue to do. Is very much needed, and we'll definitely keep in touch. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have a question related to this episode or have a request for what you would like to hear, please email us at marketing@adeptuscpas.com. You can also find us at adeptuscpas.com online or follow us at Adeptus on social media. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.